Well, hello and welcome to the Creating Connections podcast, where I bring voices and perspectives of people who are making a difference for children's learning and development. I'm Rachel Stewart and I'm passionate about connecting with people to share experiences and learn from each other how we can best support children to thrive. In this series of the podcast, we're exploring successful leaders in education so you can learn from a diverse range of people what makes a successful leader and how you can take their learnings and apply them to your leadership. Today, I'm introducing you to Michael Gray, President of the Victorian Association of Catholic Primary School Principals. Michael's Catholic education career encompasses many teaching and leadership roles across 40 years, including principalships at St Mary's Primary School Geelong, St Joseph's Primary School in Warrnambool, and St Marcellus Pernem. Today, Michael is the inaugural full-time elected President of the Victorian Association of Catholic Primary School Principals, and under his leadership, the association has prospered, achieving 80% membership of Victorian primary school principals, National Association registration, and 3 successful primary principal leadership conferences. He will share his journey into leadership on the podcast and how he is now supporting the leadership of principals across the state. So please welcome Michael Gray to the podcast today. Well, thank you for agreeing to be part of the podcast today. It's been a few years since we've known, or we met a few years ago, and we've crossed paths over the last few years in our respective roles as advocates for you, for principals, and me for parents. And yeah, we've had quite a lot of discussions about the relationship between parents and school principals and leaders and teachers. And of course, that's an area that I'm passionate about. So I'm sure we'll touch on that topic today. But you've just come off the back of your 3rd Principals Conference. So how did that go this year?
We have. So we held it again in Lorne, just down on the Ocean Road, southern Victoria. And we had an amazing 3 days together as leaders, principals, and key leadership staff from their schools, listening and learning from a whole range of amazing speakers. Our theme this year was with strength. So how do we lead with strength? And we connected with a few concepts, being vulnerability, inner strength, finding those strengths to lead us, particularly in tough times, but also in good times. We had a great attendance from across Victoria, and a great lineup of speakers.
Yeah, and of course, you're in the Catholic system, the Catholic education system, and supporting leaders across the state. And in my introduction, I mentioned that you have increased your membership over the last few years since you've become the president. But prior to that, you were a principal yourself. So could you take us back to where it all started? And I guess you started as a teacher and then moved into leadership positions. And can you share how it all began for you?
No worries, Rachel. A long journey, nearly 40 years in education now, but first started teaching in regional Victoria. And then throughout my career, I moved to the Geelong region and taught in schools around Geelong, and eventually got into principalship in Geelong, principal at St Mary's Primary School for a few years, and then was successful in gaining a position at St Joseph's Primary School in regional Victoria, the city of Warrnambool. So I was principal there for close on 25 years at that school, and in that time at St Joseph's, we had a very small parish primary school at in a little town called Pernem, about 20 minutes north of Warrnambool, and they were having difficulty getting a principal for such a very small school. So they became part of the St Joseph's school community, and we managed St Joseph's and St Marcellus for a couple of years. A variety of very big schools through to very small schools.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess it is a challenge to get principals and teachers out to those schools in the regional areas. And that's quite a long stint, 25 years. So you must have really got to know the community out there. And I guess being in a country town too, you do get to know so many different people. How did you actually go into leadership? Did you have aspirations to be a school principal, or were you tapped on the shoulder like a lot of, I suppose, a lot of leaders that I've spoken to have been tapped on the shoulder, or they've sort of happened to land into leadership positions by accident almost, or just through the process of, I guess, of their career moving into that space? Did you actually have aspirations?
Um, in the early days, probably not so much. I just wanted to make sure I was doing a good job teaching. And in that role, my real passion and love in education was curriculum. Trying to develop programs that engage students, were interesting, and fun, and obviously, consolidate their core skills, but open them to the broader world and broader possibilities. So working in curriculum allowed me to tap into that interest that I had. And it was through that role, really, that I saw potential. I enjoyed the curriculum role. I did a bit of extra study in that area that enhanced my knowledge and skills. And then from that role, I worked as a curriculum advisor for the Geelong region, which was part in the Catholic sector, part of the Melbourne Archdiocese. And so in that role as advisor, I started to see lots and lots of schools and work with lots and lots of different leadership teams. And it was probably that experience that gave me, interest in that leading the school community, but also I was working with people that encouraged my, keenness in that leadership area. So probably a small step into curriculum gave me a bit more confidence and skills. And then in that role, I could see that you could have a fantastic impact in a community by taking on that role of principal. And so it was from there that I sort of developed that interest, and through study, refined my knowledge and skills, and was able to then, sort of move into that area. And the first school I was principal of was St Mary's in Geelong, which was in that days was quite a small inner city school. And I was there for a couple of years and really enjoyed that community aspect of it. And then the opportunity came up to move to a bigger school. So it was from that experience that I was able to, feel more confident in what I was doing and how I was doing what I was doing. And I got great feedback from the students I worked with, and particularly the families. And by, building those good relationships, getting feedback from parents and staff, that, built my confidence and interest in continuing in that area.
Yeah, and you seem to me, the person that I know, Michael Gray, as a person who does relate really easily to people, and you have that special quality that I guess is required from a good leader to be able to build those relationships. What other sort of, I know that relationships being the central part of it, what other training or experience do you feel leaders need to be able to create a culture of community and also to build a successful leadership, a successful staff team as well?
Yeah, probably. I learnt that as I was doing the role. It was probably the best way I could describe it. I think that ability to form, positive, supportive relationships and get people on board with what you were thinking, and listening to what they were doing and wanting. That was a natural skill to me, but I had to then work on actually stepping up and being the leader and being clear in articulating, what it was we wanted to achieve. So I quickly learned in the role, it was more than just those, as you indicated, building the relationship. That's critical. But to be a successful leader, I felt you had to really enhance your skills and work on that part of your role. So I found, the curriculum area was very helpful for that, because it really is the core of our business. So I've always had that essential driver into my leadership, that it's really about students and learning and the community coming together to support that endeavour. And then working out what skills I had and were natural to me, what skills I didn't have, and how I could build my capacities in that area. And so in that, having a mindset where you really got to feel, it's important to build the skills that you don't necessarily have, as well as nurturing the skills that you have got. So I found, as I went and learned by doing the job, I got better at it in that sense.
It
And
seems to be
interest.
a common theme amongst all the leaders that I'm interviewing, that it really is a process, and a process of understanding yourself as well as a person. And as you mentioned about the conference and the speakers that you had recently, there's a sense of vulnerability that you need to have, and that sense of awareness of who you are as a leader, but also of the people around you and the team that you're leading and the people in the community, and having an understanding of who they are and how to actually work with them. So that, I guess, does take time to learn those skills. But have you done any other training, or have you done any personal development work to be able to understand that side of you as a person and as a leader?
Over time, I always felt it was really important to engage with professional learning, and that included formal study and not so much formal study, but I was always very interested in other disciplines. So even though I was in education, I always found it really insightful if you connected with other areas in a professional sense. And you can learn a lot, I found, from other disciplines that you can then bring to that leadership from a Catholic primary school perspective. So I did do a lot of networking and connecting with people outside of education, and forming relationships and learning about how other managers ran their institutions or their organisations. So I did a lot of that, I suppose you call it now, micro-credential work, where you're just learning how so-and-so operates, doing a lot of reading, finding really good YouTube clips and those sort of things that can give you insight to what others are learning and sharing with leadership. Over the course, I had 3 or 4 really amazing opportunities through leave and sabbaticals I attended Boston University and did a course there, which was in the faith area. That was a wonderful opportunity where you had a very you lived in experience. You worked with excellent leaders, and you also had a group of other principals or aspiring principals or people involved in other aspects of education learning together. So I found that as a significant opportunity and experience. And then I also did a course through Notre Dame University, based in Jerusalem, at the Tantur Ecumenical Institute. And again, that was a live-in program that it was particularly focused in the faith area of our Catholic identity and story, and spending time, again, working with a whole mix of professionals working across a whole range of disciplines. That experience where you had theory in the morning, but then you also had a lot of practical experience in visiting a lot of key religious sites throughout that Jerusalem and the broader Israel area. Again, that was a really great experience. But I think, I always found it really good to connect with people who were leaders and learning from other disciplines to bring that to education.
Yeah, I think that's great. And what sort of things did you learn from managers and other leaders outside of education that you have brought into your own style of leadership?
Particularly a very sharp focus on what's the purpose of your organisation and the vision you have that you would like to share and build with your community, and be really focused on that. So in my earlier days of leadership, probably looking back now, you felt you were doing this, and then you're over here doing that, and then you were doing this, and then you were doing that, and you'd sit back and go, oh, have we achieved anything? And what I learned from other organisations was a really how important a laser sharp focus is on the purpose and what you're actually trying to achieve, and then spending time on that and working towards that, and the ability to have really good processes and procedures around you and your school community that deal with the important everyday things, but doesn't drag your attention to that all the time. Because I felt as the leader, it was really important to do and support the thinking and um, the bigger picture work. And particularly in a big school, you had people who could support you in that, because if you had good processes and procedures, you could deal with the everyday, which then freed you to focus up on the bigger picture work.
Yep. So it's really, you shift gears into a completely different role as a leader, as opposed to a teacher, because you are overseeing the vision and really bringing it to life. How challenging is it to go from a small school and building that sort of culture of community and the team that you want to have in that sort of setting? How challenging is it to go from that to a really large school and to create a culture that you would like to see as well? With and I suppose you just touched on it. Then you actually have more support in a larger school, but there's more people to manage. So how do you shift into that sort of space without sort of losing that small community sense of belonging and that culture that you've already created?
Yes. Look, well, how I would describe it, in a small school, essentially the 2 or 3 staff, you do everything. So it's very much a multitasking from maintenance through to staff meetings to the parent support, student help. So you're intimately engaged with everything. And so you can set the tone and theme and ideas just by who you are and how you're going about what you're doing, because you have constant contact with the students, families, and the staff. When you move to a bigger setting, it's impossible for you to run the community, run the school in that sort of same way. So then it's more about, giving freedom and delegation to the levels, and then working with that core team to build that common vision, common understanding, and the way we go about things. So you shift more from a generalist, in my view, to much more specific, and you have to work out where you can have the greatest impact. And in a bigger school, that's supporting your leaders and your staff. And then again, as I said, it's really important, in my view, to have quality processes and procedures that everyone is clear about, that can work their way through in a consistent, fair, equitable way. So a lot of your work is developing those procedures to ensure how you want the community to work and be flows right down through. But also, the other thing is, I'd say in a big school, the really critical thing is still having those relationships with the students, so that in a primary setting especially, the young students really want to know who the leader is, what their view of the world is, and you become a very, very important person in their life, because they're growing and developing. They've come from, their family arrangements, whatever that is. The next key people in their lives are, in a lot of ways, the teachers and, leaders within the primary school setting. So young students, all students really like to know essentially that there's a good order and a good safety net in how things happen, and who is in charge, and that person in charge is fair, reasonable, a bit of fun, happy to listen to me. So I always found it really critical to work in the bigger school setting with the older students, your grade 5 and 6 students, because they're setting the culture of students within the school setting, but also at the other end, young students and new families coming in. So I tried to divide my connection into those areas. So you had to definitely prioritise. but yeah, I always felt it was really important to stay connected with the students, and even today in the role that I have as president of the association, understanding student needs is really still important because ultimately that's the purpose of the school. And in our setting, that's about supporting their faith journey, making sure they've got the skills to go forward with their life wherever they want to go to.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually. How do you maintain those connections with the students and with the families in a big school setting? And it can be very easy to get bogged down in all the other responsibilities that you have as a leader and
Yeah.
forget and sort of become disconnected. And it's really important to maintain that those responsibilities. So how did you actually go about doing that in terms of connecting with the students? I know I witnessed a principal. I did a walk around with a principal one time at a primary school in Bendigo,
Yeah.
and he was so admired by the students. They would all come up to him and they had so much respect for him because he would go out and spend time with them, chatting to them, and just really getting to know the kids. And they clearly felt safe because he was there. And that sounds like the sort of culture that you created as well.
Yeah. No, look, I think, and look, you can do it. You can be, as a leader, isolated in a small community as well as a big community. Vice versa, I feel you can be very connected in a small community, but also a bigger school community. In the bigger school, you have to be very mindful and directed in that way if you want to have that sort of connection with the students at their level and also at the staff. So I used to love leading assembly. Um, because that was where you were bringing together and celebrating and, reminding people of how to behave and where to go and all of those sort of practical things. But if you just turned up for assembly and did that, it had no meaning. You had to then go back and connect into the classrooms. So I always used to visit classrooms a lot. I didn't do a lot of teaching, but I would often be in the classroom talking about issues that might have been on the TV or in the schoolyard or something that they were interested in. And, I had the freedom where I could focus on the students' needs and interests without having to spend hours and hours of planning that you need to do to deliver good lessons. So, as a principal, you had that unique opportunity to really help the learning in a very organic sense because you were sharing ideas, listening to what they were saying, and also telling stories. I found telling stories to the young people about life in the school, your own personal life, or people out in the broader community, that really resonated with young people. And it often gave the teachers, when you'd leave the room, the teachers could follow up on some of those points and expand on them as they went along through their teaching. But yeah, I felt it was really important to be in the classrooms, to be visible. Um, and, I always tried to coach a couple of the sports teams because I've always found that was a good way to connect with the students because it wasn't about, rules. It was about together we're going to achieve this. And also parents came to a lot of those activities and events. So you had that wonderful opportunity to be constantly talking to parents in a very friendly, supportive way and proactive rather than reactive. And often when something went wrong, if you had a connection and relationship with the student and the parent, you were able to manage that better and support everyone through that relationship.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into family engagement and parent engagement in learning. What sort of what sort of strategies did you put in place, and did you draw on any sort of the research and frameworks that are available when it came to family engagement in your community?
Um, most the starting point, in my view, was from the very moment you had open days and enrolments. I think I think it was really important that you, as the leader, were part of that process. And so your connection with the parents started from that moment. Our focus was, we always tried to build 2 or 3 key parents who were interested in being able to help and support the classroom, encourage those sort of programs so that the parent could share their talents and gifts with their school community, gave the teacher a chance to work with those parents, and it gave me a way to connect with those parents. So any parent engagement program, whether it be formally with the teaching and learning program or informally through the whole range of committees that you have in a school, they have to be a priority. And the parents had to see you as a leader felt they were in priority. So one of our major events that we had for many, many years was a school fair. And, an old-fashioned concept in a lot of ways, but it did help parents come together to support the objectives of the school. And it was parents, teachers, and students really on a level together, working on an outcome to raise money for the school to purchase this or to get that program. So I always felt parent engagement worked well if there was a specific project with a target that everyone was working towards, and parents could jump in and be part of that, or jump out if they had to focus on their family or whatever. So the ability to have small projects that had a particular purpose and focus and a goal, I always felt was a good way to connect with parents, because they felt they'd contributed and achieved something and shared their gifts, but they weren't tied to the school community every day. So, yeah, that's the way I approached it, where you sort of focused on programs that were supporting the learning, but also the bigger picture of the school, but projects that had start and end points, and projects that, achieve specific things to help the school be a better place.
Yeah, which I guess in some ways is parent involvement, but and it's getting, I guess, more challenging to have parents on site now. Where do you see the gaps are in terms of the knowledge of school leaders around parent engagement and the way that it can be implemented to support student learning at home, rather than, I guess, expecting parents to be on site? And of course, there's always going to be a group of parents that are very enthusiastic and keen to be involved at the school and put their hand up for volunteer roles and that sort of thing, and being in the classroom. But we know the reality now is that most parents are working, or they have other responsibilities where they don't have enough time to come into the school. But there are certainly ways that they can be supporting learning at home. But there's not a lot of training for teachers and for school leaders around how to do this. What are your thoughts around that?
I think one of the biggest learnings that schools had over the COVID period was the value that well-informed and supportive parents can have in the learning outcomes of the students. Over that period where the school couldn't operate as normal, schools had to find different ways to help the students learn. And critical to that was the partnership with the family, particularly in the primary school setting, whereby we found that if we briefed the parents about what the goals of what the learning was and how they could help with that learning, and during COVID, if the family was fortunate enough that they could help and be present, that really provided the parent to an insight into their child as a learner, but also how to help students learn. So in that period, teachers were doing a lot of work helping parents to be teachers of their child, to help them achieve what you were trying to do, because that personal interaction, that daily contact wasn't there in the physical, so you had to build it in a different way. So I think, that's one thing that schools really learnt, the power of that sort of support and that support extended to the broader family network. In my view, the families and students who thrived over that COVID period were families who were able to extend their support out into the grandparent network or the uncles and aunties and parents. So the family units and the connection to people coming together supported, the objectives of what the learning was and trying to help the children achieve their best in very unusual circumstances. So going back to your question, I think the role of the school today is also about helping parents understand learning and
Yes.
understanding learning as a parent. That's a skill you can build. And if you can understand the processes of learning, the purpose of it, the broader concepts, it's not just about the pure facts, but it's about problem solving thinking. If we can support the parents with that, they naturally work with that way with their child outside of the school hours or whenever issues come up from the school day. To me, parent education is not about helping from a school perspective, not about always helping a parent be a better parent, but it's about helping them understand learning so that they can bring their knowledge and their skills and their expertise to that process and value add for the student or the student and their friends in their circle.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And for so long, parents have really been positioned to only focus on the end result and the pressure that they feel to ensure that that's happening, that their child is succeeding in all aspects is
Yeah.
immense. And it seems to have ramped up actually. But I think you're right. The pandemic in some ways was a blessing in disguise because parents were able to have an insight into what teachers are doing and how learning happens for their children. And that really gives them a broader understanding of how their child is progressing, but also the process of learning. And yeah, it's really critical because when, as parents, we don't understand how our children actually learn how to read or how they're learning to write. And only this morning I saw on a parent Facebook group that I follow just to get some
Yeah.
insights into what questions parents are asking. One of them
Yeah.
was questioning her child writing letters backwards, but we all know that that's perfectly normal in the early years of school when they're trying to learn how to write. But even just knowing that as a parent, that's actually quite normal, would just
Yeah. Yeah.
break down those walls of, fears and things that parents have around their kids not doing well at school. And so I think what you're saying is correct, and there needs to be more awareness, I suppose, around how to actually help parents understand how learning works. And I suppose that's part of my work as well in helping parents understand that cognitive skills
Yeah.
and
Yes.
non-cognitive skills are so critical for learning.
Yeah.
Have you noticed, I suppose, over your time, how children's cognitive and non-cognitive skills have declined? And is that, I suppose, one of the greatest challenges that we have at the moment is to build those skills?
Look, anecdotally, when from an outsider looking in, you can sometimes think, are people learning? Are they growing and developing? But I always find when you're in the school, walking around, the students today have amazing understanding of the importance of basic skills, but also of the broader picture of learning, problem solving, having a view on climate, being able to talk about the earth. Noticing in our schoolyard, a school I was at the other day, a big development's going on now near them, and a lot of trees were knocked down in that process. And the students were absolutely mortified to think that these beautiful trees had all of a sudden gone. So going back to your question about cognitive skills, their ability to see what's around them, interpret it, and bring it to their learning and build that capacity broader than just the basic knowledge is, trees grow, they need water, they need sunlight. But if they're not there, what does that mean? If they are there, what does that mean? So I don't think schools have got great at identifying and assessing all the rich learning that happens. We've got better at learning to identify, the academic progress, etc. We're getting better at building capacities to understand social development. We aren't great yet at really, on a broad whole scale, measuring, those problem solving ability to be resilient, etc., etc. And not that you want to measure everything, because within a primary school setting, in my view, the purpose of the primary school is about the core skills, but also those mindsets, resilience, having a go, learning from your mistakes, understanding, there's more than one side to a story. Those basic mindsets and dispositions, I think, are really important to encourage in the primary setting, so that when they move through to the secondary and then their work life, that they've got some foundational understandings of those. So those broader cognitive skills, I think the schools are getting a lot better at building and understanding the importance of those and helping develop programs that help achieve that.
Yeah.
At the same time, we have to ensure those fundamentals are there, because if you can't, read, write, interpret, understand, comprehend, the access to knowledge and information and, happiness and all of those things is severely restricted.
Yeah, and I guess it's about having that equity in education so that all children are able to develop those skills, and in some ways that is a parenting role as well in a lot of ways. And it's a tricky space, I suppose, if there are children who are struggling, and we're seeing a lot more children with neurodiverse learning needs, to, I suppose, educate parents in their role, as we've touched on, to develop those skills as well, especially if they are struggling themselves with their own resilience and the challenges of life. So how are you supporting school leaders across Victoria with all of those different things that they are grappling with in their schools now? I suppose it's quite a broad area of, there's so many different things that they need to be on top of now. There's a lot of balls in the air. And how are you supporting them in your new role, in your current role, to be able to manage those? I guess you call them challenges, but they're also, I always look at challenges as opportunities for growth and growth and development in our own understanding of people and humans. And of course, you're in the business of education, but it's also in the business of human development and developing these little people into adults. How are you actually supporting school leaders with those particular areas of growth?
In our specific role, what we've tried to do is really narrow it to our brief, which is leadership and building leadership capacity. And how we are supporting principals with that is really being very specific about understanding yourself as a person, making sure you are connected to colleagues, because we know that colleagues and networks are the greatest supporter of a principal leader, A, when things aren't going so well, and B, broadening your knowledge and seeing how other people do things. And also when things are going well, have the confidence to share that with your colleagues and, be confident in what you're doing and how you're going about the work. So our really focus is on building that inner confidence in the leader themselves, that they have got a lot to share. No leader is the same. You are a leader in your own right, and what you bring to that is critically important and may be very different from your neighbour. So we focus on getting principals together. And the conference is a perfect example of that, where we bring people from all across Victoria, small schools, big schools, regional, rural, metro, and giving them opportunities to hear stories of leaders and how they've faced challenges and how they've led with compassion, resilience, and strength, and then sharing that amongst yourselves and building that network that can help you in your job. As well as that, shifting the focus on to very specific skills, so having a framework to build a vision for your school, and giving frameworks to enable that, because that's the core part of your work. Frameworks for how you deal with staff, managing to get them together, professional development of staff. And in our setting, particularly, that focus on your faith and spirituality and bringing that dimension to yourself, but also to your role, because we, in our sector, believe that has a lot to do with supporting the purpose of your school and you being better at your job. Going back to the other point I'd make, going back to your parent comment, the interesting thing with Catholic education, it was always established with the understanding that the parent is the first educator of their child. And we've tried to recapture that understanding with principals as well, that it is a partnership between family, student, and you as the leader. And that connection is critical and important to, a successful school, in my view.
Yes. Do you find in your role working with school principals that there is still some resistance in working with parents? Or is it?
I would say that the feeling would be that because of the changes in society and how it is, and in reality, society today is different than it was 10 years ago, very different than it was 25 years ago. So a school could be nervous about that, and so tends to maybe retreat from that relationship a bit and trying to make sure there's protection against problems. Whereas the opposite is a better way to go forward, whereas you embrace that difference and opportunity, and how can I bring that to improving the relationship and the school and the learning. It is very, very difficult because I think there was the ABC program, The Drum, and they used to have quite a few speakers come to that. One of them was a secondary school principal of a large secondary school in Sydney, and she made a very interesting point when she was talking about parents, school community, COVID and those issues. The point she made was 20 years ago when she started at the school, as the principal leader, she was reinforcing the norms of behaviour and the expectations that were very similar to the community she lived in. Now she feels sometimes she almost has to put a fence around the school and say, what you see out there, those values, those behaviours are not appropriate. Here, this is how we want to be and act and look after each other. So that role as the principal, she felt had changed significantly, where you were helping build the norms of society and help your children know and understand them, to now having to be really clear about what the norms of behaviour are within our school and being able to resist some of what we see outside. So I just thought that was a very interesting point she made with that sort of change in society and difference. The other side of that coin is, I'd say, in a lot of ways, it really presents a unique opportunity, I think, because it's through seeing challenges and addressing those challenges, it gets better. And young people have the ability to take that with them on their journey. So if, particularly in primary schools, if you can go about it in a positive way, recognise problems, address and call them out for what they are, but then build the capacity and skills for young people to deal with that, move forward. It's a much better outcome, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it has to do too with our lack of understanding of human behavior in many ways, and I guess society or social values have changed a lot over the years, and people have certain values that might conflict with educators' values, and in a lot of schools, I suppose, many traditional schools haven't changed the way they do things, whereas society's sort of moved on to a more contemporary approach to different things, and that's where the conflicts can arise, where they're sort of rubbing up against each other. But the capacity to actually come together to talk about these things is I suppose still a challenge in schools, and having those opportunities for dialogue, and I guess in many ways the structure of schools doesn't allow for that sort of conversation or those types of discussions to be had. They're more likely to be had on social media, like me following
Yeah.
these Facebook groups to see what they're talking about and doing a bit of spying and understanding from the parent perspective what their challenges are. And I guess what I've seen is that we just need to take the time to understand each other's perspectives and really understand how to meet in the middle for children, because obviously we have a shared responsibility to raise children, and never to forget that they're at the center. And I guess that is very clear in the Catholic ethos, that children are at the center of all of what we do, and we're developing the whole child. How do you think that the Catholic faith has driven you in your role as a leader, but also how it creates or has the capacity to create a different way of being, I guess, as part of a Catholic school community?
Yeah, to me, I suppose the faith component of the work is it connects you to the human person in their strengths, challenges, gifts, and difficulties. Um, and that connection to the human person and understanding the human and seeing them as good and potential has always sustained me in the role, and also something that I've found valuable to hold on to, especially when things are difficult and things are complicated and things aren't going your way. So that aspect of the faith I've always found important to me personally, but also particularly in the role as a principal or a leader within our school, or in that fact as a teacher. Um, then I suppose too, I find great enjoyment in knowing the stories of our faith, either the people or the gospels, and the life lessons that come through those. And I've always found that those stories help young people connect to the essence of what is important in life. And the ability to be able to share those stories through daily life in a classroom or through liturgy or celebrations, I think helps build resilience, a deeper sense of your purpose, how to deal with difficulties, how to celebrate the good times, how to manage tough times. So to me, yeah, the faith sort of walks with you and supports you in that role. And a principal as a leader has the opportunity to live that out through the role. And that's something that's very special and unique.
Yeah, and it's a very personal journey too, a journey of faith. And I guess there's still a perception out there, and we've talked a little bit about this in my previous role,
Yeah,
of Catholic schools, and there's a lot of, I suppose, people who haven't been brought up Catholic or in a religion or a faith-based upbringing, where they don't really understand what a Catholic education looks like or means. And I think what you just touched on there is absolutely what it's about, and developing that whole person. But how do you
yeah.
think that is one of your roles to break down those, I guess, misperceptions around Catholic education as well?
I mean, in the role of president of the association, you do have that broader responsibility to, explain why it's important, what's good about faith, um, and how I see that playing out in the role I have. I have amazing connections and relationships with a lot of leaders in other sectors, the government sector and the independent sector. And there is a lot of common ground between those three sectors in what we're trying to help achieve for our leaders, but also the students in our schools. So I find, my role is more about, sharing what's good and what faith brings to me as a leader, but being very respectful and listening to what other people say about leadership and understanding, a good leader doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, and there's different views on how that comes around. And that dialogue between people and around people and with people is really important. And I've always felt, from a Catholic's perspective, is we've got a lot to learn from many, many other people. And because you do have a faith and a personal faith, that puts you more into the learning mode, and from others than the telling, is how I feel. But sometimes, institutions can often get into the telling mode rather than the learning mode. And, from my perspective, a Catholic primary leader is more about learning and building and sharing and nurturing than telling.
Yeah. I actually always used to call in the correspondence I created learning communities. We're all learning together
Yeah,
because, every day we've got a chance to learn something new.
yeah,
In your role, also, you have, I guess, the challenge of being in the middle of, I suppose, the conduit between government and system decision makers, and then the school principals who have to actually implement whatever the decisions are that come out of government and the system. And yeah, I guess that's probably one of the greatest challenges is how do you support principals to implement, say, for example, the new curriculum that's come out,
yeah,
and how challenging all of those decisions are to actually carry out, especially in smaller schools who don't have the resources. Um, how else are you supporting school leaders around those particular challenges, and also their own well-being challenges that they may have when it comes to really managing all the stresses and the workload that they're under?
yeah. That's, in a funny sort of way, that's one part of the job that I enjoy, being able to
Because it's a
understand.
challenge.
Yeah, yeah,
Keeps you on
yeah.
your
Like
toes.
it does. It keeps you, and
Yeah.
it's almost a problem in the sense, it's to understand, government legislation and policy, system, focus, and then helping put that to understand it, then put it into a way that helps leaders see the purpose of it or the core of it, and then understanding, by building capacities and skills for the principal in that leadership role, to know how to delegate or manage or act in those situations. So it's a little bit of really good listening to the leaders and understanding what they're trying to achieve, and being a bit of a conduit or a communicator to interpret that to the person who's sitting at the desk or out in the yard, sorting out the issue between two students. Because in a lot of cases, the principal doesn't have time for that deep reflection. So part of our role is to help, through our communication, through being in schools, to help interpret that policy, etc., in an everyday sense, but also then taking the everyday and reminding the policymakers about what is practical, what is not, is also part of the role. So it's a two-way street. And it's certainly, an interesting perspective, because essentially our job is to, obviously support the principal, but we're all part of a bigger picture, in our case, Catholic education, but also in Australia, education. So it's also working and understanding government policy. There's lots of many examples of legislation that's come in the last 15, 20 years that puts huge demands on schools and the administration of schools. And it would easily be say, oh, we don't need that. But the core of the legislation often is coming from a very good place. It's either helping the school be better, helping the person be better, or helping the system be better. So there's lots and lots of examples of that. But the thing is, it can add up. And then when you're at the coalface, that can be overwhelming, just the pure management part of the job. And that's important for systems and governments to understand, that we still want that person at the core coalface to have the time to do the important things, not just be sitting there working on administration. But it's not easy.
Yeah, I remember when the building funding came in, I think it was through the Rudd government, and all of a sudden principals had to be project managers of these massive projects, and they'd never done project management like that at that scale before. So it was kind of all of a sudden switching roles and really not having enough time to do everything else. So even though it's the legislation and the funding was positive, it's positive for many schools, it also caused a lot of I guess a lot of challenges for many principals who were thrown into that role out of the blue, seemingly.
Oh, absolutely. And that's just one example of many. And particularly in that policy area now around, social cohesion, development, safety, all of those areas, they did significantly have to improve. But they are very complex pieces of work that the schools have to manage now. And the critical point is that, the resourcing of it, as you alluded to, it's one thing to build something and have a building, but it's got to be powered by people. And, that's the very costly part of education. And we have to keep arguing for the importance of resourcing people to do the job well. And I think that's a really big challenge for us going forward.
Yeah. So do you want to share a little bit about the Wellbeing portal that you've created for VAC PSP members?
So the Wellbeing portal, yes. What we've done there is trying to put a whole heap of resources available for principals to access easily around that wellbeing area, both personally, looking after yourself as an individual, but also as a professional. And we've tried to curate a lot of resources and say, okay, this is trusted information that you can access easily and quickly, rather than spending a lot of time yourself searching for a lot of these things that can support you. So very simply, it could be quality YouTube clips we've been able to identify and make available, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of those just everyday resources.
Is there anything else before we finish up that you'd like to add around, I guess, encouraging new leadership or people who want to move into leadership positions, and anything else you'd like to share about your organisation as well?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Firstly, I'd say it's been enjoyable talking about it, so thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
Yeah, the second thing is, look, the thing that I would share with young people is education is a fantastic career to be involved in. There is amazing opportunities in a whole range of ways for people to work within education. It's not all just, one specific job. There's a variety now. And in that leadership area, there's amazing opportunities to really impact on the life of communities and schools. And it's an industry that it gives a lot, it takes a lot, but in that process, you can have an impact. So I say to young people who are thinking about education that, yeah, it's a fantastic career. There's variety, there's various pathways, and it's a future industry that the world's going to need. So good people working in schools is critical, I think, for the health and well-being and learning of society, and encouraging good people who are proactive and have great positive mindsets to get into education is important.
Yeah, and of course, the main goal is to have an impact on children and prepare them for their future as well. So thank you
Yeah,
so much for your time today. It's been really interesting having a discussion with you about all different aspects of leadership and your role and how you're supporting school principals across Victoria. So thank you for all the work you're doing. And yeah, I
not a
look
problem.
forward
Good to chat,
to
Rach.
continuing following your journey. Well, what another inspiring interview in our Leadership in Education series of our Creating Connections podcast. If you enjoyed this interview and would like to learn more from other leaders in education, please click on the subscribe button to receive further podcasts on your feed. If you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, click on the link below to book a meeting with me to learn more about you and your leadership in education. Or if you're listening to this podcast, send an email to rachel@practicallylearning.com.au to express your interest in being on the podcast. If you're a school leader or teacher with aspirations for leadership, but you're challenged with self-doubt, overwhelm, and whether you have what it takes to take that next step, our Connect with Your Mind Mastery Coaching Program can support you to work on your own self-mastery to become the leader you aspire to be. For further information about our coaching and professional learning programs, please visit our website at practicallylearning.com.au or click on one of the links below and visit our podcast for our future series of interviews to support you as the adults who are guiding children on their learning journey. I do hope you enjoy the rest of our episodes on our Creating Connections podcast, and I hope to meet you soon.